Okay, so I have two videos by this person because one of them's not very long, and I'll try and keep them moving a little bit. But yeah, this first one is called "The Trans Cult is Erasing Gender Non-Conformity." So yeah, I'll see what he says. I have a feeling this stuff I'm probably going to agree with because it does kind of seem like gender non-conformity has been kind of corralled into this like overall like queer thing. But hey, let's see what he says.
Mulan was your favorite movie as a kid? I just have one question for you. How's your transition going?
I've done many videos on my channel about how gender identity is a new religious movement. It is a spiritual cult that uses social media and these online digital platforms to recruit into the cult. And this is the perfect example of what I'm talking about, because this is taking gender nonconformity in women, in young girls, and it's medicalizing it. It's saying that, if you associate or relate to a character in a movie that is gender nonconforming, then that's a sign that you're trans. This is how the indoctrination into the trans identity happens. This is how indoctrination into the religion of gender identity operates, via these very subtle and insidious social media algorithms, planting these suggestive seeds in your mind, saying like, oh, you're gender nonconforming as a young woman, you must be trans, you must be non-binary. It couldn't possibly be the fact that you're just like an autistic, same-sex attracted, gender non-conforming woman. That couldn't possibly be what you are. No, you must be trans.
I was like gender non-conforming before I started transitioning. So we're talking like 10 plus years ago. Like, obviously none of this kind of stuff was around, like the kind of TikTok stuff, trans pride, like the kind of gender identity stuff we have now. I kind of wonder what would have happened to me if I was the same person like now when I was about 20 or something like that. Because it was never suggested to me at all that I was trans, because none of this really existed. I just kind of followed my own interests and carried on with my life, not really knowing what to do about this gender shit that was bothering me, Like, I wonder what would have happened. I wonder if I would have been more easily sucked into kind of the pervasive kind of ideology or not.
You must be non-binary. And then once you start taking on these labels of like non-binary and like trans, and you start going down these social media algorithm pipelines such that you're interacting with all these other non-binary and like trans identified females, then you're going to start seeing the glamorization of like top surgery, of double mastectomy, cutting off your healthy tissue in order to live out some aesthetic fantasy. To be part of a subculture, to be cool, to queer the binary, to challenge cis heteronormativity or whatever. It becomes plugged into like a political movement, an ideological movement, an activist movement.
I'm guessing for a source in any of this, you'd kind of go on TikTok or something. I fully believe that this shit's out there. I didn't go on TikTok myself, but
a social movement, a aesthetic movement, a subculture. And if this was merely about aesthetics, merely about fashion, merely about teenagers exploring their identity, it'd be no big deal. No one would be talking about this if this was just normal teenage identity exploration. If this was merely about these young women just like playing with new labels and identities. The problem is that this is all being medicalized. We are medicalizing gender nonconformity. We're medicalizing autism. We're medicalizing same-sex attraction, saying that if you are these things, then you must be trans, you must be non-binary. And if you're trans and non-binary, that whole culture, the religion of trans, is very commonly necessarily associated with ritual body modification procedures. The holy rite of like trans, the like holy rite of top surgery, all these things. And one of my favorite people in the space who's like talked about these sort of religious aspects of this gender identity movement is Exu Lansik. So go check out Exu Lansik's work on this topic of religion and gender identity, and how all this new non-binaryism, it's becoming a new religious movement that is selling a pathway to spiritual happiness through ritual body modification and these holy ceremonial rites of like trans milestones and like all this stuff. And this is dangerous because it's medicalizing gender nonconformity. If you talk to old lesbians, like old school butch lesbians, they'll say that this non-binary movement, this trans movement, it's transed away all the butches. All the butches are on testosterone now, because as a society, we're not making space for gender.
I kind of wonder, how do you even like measure stuff like this? Like, I try and think of like criticisms in my head and where you kind of go from there. I don't know. I guess to back this kind of thing up, you'd have to look through a lot of like TikTok shit, the kind of stuff that's like more marketed at kids, probably quite easy to fall down a rabbit hole of,
You're not conforming women. We're transing it away because that's seen.
Like, the weird thing is, like, when I go out now, I see like a butch lesbian. Like 10 years ago, I'd be like, oh, it's a butch lesbian. Now it's like, is it a butch lesbian? Are they a trans man? I don't know. But hey, that's not necessarily a problem. It's just, my thinking's changed a lot since then. And you do kind of wonder, like, are a lot of those butch lesbians like now trans? I'm not sure.
As like the easier path. And we're not celebrating and promoting and encouraging women to accept themselves as gender nonconforming women, which pushes them down a unnecessary medical pathway. This is not medically necessary. This is not life-saving healthcare. This is a religious movement pushing people into trans identification as part of these social contagion of.
I also really don't like the idea of like, it's life-saving medication because otherwise people will kill themselves. Like, it's a bit weird. It's a very common manipulation tactic. So necessarily it doesn't sound great, straight away. When we're talking about something that's not a mental health medication, it's because of a specific outcome or whatever, which can come along with so many things, I think it's so difficult to know if seeing more trans people is influencing more people to transition who aren't actually trans, or that more visibility can help people realize what their feelings are to reduce social stigma to come out. I think it's probably best to look at regret rates and things like that than this dude implying it's all just insidious influencing. To be honest, I think that there is an element of what this guy's saying in terms of like things like TikTok. There is a lot of content that does kind of glamorize it to people. It's the same way, like, you get all those like ADHD people who are like, do you do this thing, that thing, this thing, and that thing? Quirky, relatable stuff that probably loads of people do. Well, then you might have ADHD, stuff like that. I think it's that kind of thing. I need to spend some time on TikTok, but it's one of those things that I'm dreading doing. But I think there's probably elements of all of those things, honestly. I mean, you also have to think about, like, with younger people, what happens when one transitions and then others start transitioning. Like, how much is, like, social contagion a factor, or in that, how much are they in a specific social group that transitioning or taking on a certain identity might be beneficial to them. Like, I've known people like that who have taken on trans identities very cheaply, as in, like, not actually doing anything to change themselves, or even changing their look even. And then taking on trans identity because they're already in those kind of circles, but they're cis, so they don't get the same kind of, So I've definitely seen that kind of thing happening. I think anyone that's saying, like, oh, it's all this is probably going to be wrong necessarily, but they might be onto a part of the problem, if that makes sense.
Social media algorithms that are pushing these very suggestive contents that's saying, like, yeah, if you relate to a gender non-conforming cartoon character, you must be trans. Therefore, you probably need to cut your tits off because like you are, you need that as part of like healthcare. No, that's crazy. We need to stop medicalizing gender nonconformity. We need to start celebrating gender nonconformity. Celebrate just being a gender nonconforming woman. Talk to older butch lesbians. Talk to the butches. Talk to masculine women. Celebrate masculinity in like women. Okay, that's it for this video. Thanks for watching. Take care. Bye bye.
I can see how kids go down these like rabbit holes. So it's always hard to see. It's always hard to say what has this much effect and what has that much effect. I think it's dangerous to just kind of attribute it to one thing and then never waver from that. which for all I know, maybe this person is doing as well, but they might have a point even if they're taking it way too far, I guess, if that makes sense.
Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Ray. I am a detransition male. And today I'm talking about male socialization because this is one of the things that they hate talking about. They hate talking about—
I'll be honest, I chose this one. This is called Trans Woman Talks Female Socialization. One thing I find is that a lot of like queer podcasts and like queer people talking in general about like socialization is that it usually becomes very quickly apparent when they don't really know how the other side socializes. Like, I don't really know too much about what it's like being a female because I was born male. I transitioned. There's a whole bunch of stuff that's female that I didn't take on, like periods and stuff like that, because you can't. And yeah, sometimes it becomes very obvious when, say, a trans man is talking about a male issue when clearly they don't actually know what it's like having been male, you know. So I thought it'd be interesting.
About how males and females are socialized differently in childhood and going through adolescence, precisely because of innate sexual differences between males and females. And those sexual differences are based on the sexual dimorphism of the human species, based on the fact that one half of the species are the ones that produce babies, and the other half are the one who impregnate the ones who produce babies. And that fundamental difference creates a difference in socialization. And trans women don't like to be reminded of this because it like basically triggers their dysphoria. It triggers their dislike of their maleness. It reminds them that they will never be female. They can only wish to be female. And so just no matter how many surgeries and how many hormones you go on,
What do I make of Ray? So far I'm like interested, I guess. With the trans cult stuff, it's not that I don't disagree. I think there needs work on how we like present things, if you know what I mean, like present evidence of where it's clearly showing, because it's something I want to get into as well, because I think there are like very culty elements of like trans circles and stuff. I don't like it either, you know, but yeah, I don't know if maybe showing some TikToks as examples of like the kind of social media conditioning you could be talking about, that might have been helpful, but I don't know. I'll keep watching, I guess. It's the first time I've watched him. I think that's probably only so far that any one person's going to go, because at what point a video is just ridiculously long and unwatchable. I don't know, it's a hard needle to thread, or whatever the term is.
these trans women will never have the same experience as a young female growing up in society. They just won't. And that is troublesome.
I mean, stuff like this is true. Like, I don't know what it's like being a female. I don't know what it's like being like a 13-year-old girl walking home from school and being like wolf whistled by some prick on a building site, you know?
For them. Okay, let's watch this video where this trans feminine content creator is talking about socialization, because you'll sort of see how they deny the innate sexual differences, and they sort of don't really understand what it means to be socialized female or socialized male. Okay, let's watch.
Yeah, socialization is this really frustrating and annoying transphobic dog whistle because it utilizes half-truths, and because it utilizes this half-truth, then it really shuts down these important and really interesting conversations. Because the thing is when you talk about gendered
I agree there's social influence and people that shouldn't transition. This guy seems to be leaning too heavily in the social contagion angle, implying it was crazy to transition. Yeah, I think he does definitely lean on one side of the fence, but I don't know, we're still watching. He has quite a lot of content. Like, he did some stuff about the AGP thing, and like, my take on the AGP thing is that there's definitely a thing that exists, but the whole typology thing, you've got AGPs and you've got HSTS and that's it. Like, breaking it down into two sections is like way too reductive for me. And I can see why people would want to use that in order to be like insulting, you know? Because like, for example, I've always been attracted to women, but I actually transitioned quite young, like I was 25. So I already don't fit the typology, but you know, I'm kind of somewhere between the two, because I don't know, I've always been kind of gay, but like not gay. I don't know. It's hard to explain. I guess that's my young experience of like gender dysphoria coming out, if anything.
socialization, when those studies are being conducted, yeah, socialization is this really frustrating and annoying transphobic dog whistle.
Transphobic dog whistle. See, to me, when people do this, it's because they wanna not talk about that. So they're saying this is why we shouldn't address that.
because it utilizes half-truths, and because it utilizes this half-truth, then it really shuts down these important and really interesting conversations. Because the thing is when you talk about gendered socialization, when those studies are being conducted, think if you're a researcher, who would you want to exclude in your population, in your sample, for your study, when you're looking at the impacts of gender and how...
Whenever I hear dog whistle, I predict that I'll hear a bad take. Yeah, it does make me flinch a little bit, but I don't know. I try and give people the benefit of the doubt. But it's important to remember that a lot of the time when someone will like define something as a dog whistle, like they're taking your agency away because they're saying, well, when you say this, you're actually saying this, which is not necessarily true. And if that's the case, then how do you express when you do actually mean that thing? You know? And to me, it seems like a tactic to not engage. Because someone says something that is a good point, for example, and the other person will say, like, hey, you know, you weren't socialized as a female, so that's a difference between you and females, you know? And to say, like, oh, no, that's actually a dog whistle, like, you're not actually engaging with this argument, but you're still hand-waving it, you know? I experience that, like, over and over, I find. And it's not just with trans people, to be clear, it's with people that are wrong about shit in general.
That impacts someone's socialization. Who would you exclude? Probably the 1% of the population who has a completely different experience with gender and who actually experiences both sides of the coin.
No.
I would never say that I experience both sides of the coin. There are ways in which I do, but universally, in terms of my entire experience in my life, has been like female in many ways. Like, I didn't know about that. Might have to do with the first time I heard it was when someone said being against pedos was a Nazi dog. Was that Ethan is online by any chance?
You do not experience both sides. This is the lie. This is a false lie. A young trans feminine person, a trans identified male, or someone who will grow up to become a trans identified male, they do not experience both sides because there's only two pathways you can go down with your puberty. You can go down the male puberty or the...
I would say in terms of experiencing both sides, it's more like specific like, oh fuck, what am I trying to say? Specific like circumstances. So for example, I've been hit on as a man and I've been hit on as a woman because, well, as a trans woman, you know, which plenty of people will shorten to be a woman. So like I can probably talk to that to some extent, but there's going to be a lot of things that females experience, especially people that grew up female, that I just have no idea about. And it's not good to pretend that you kind of know everything about both because you're trans, if that makes sense.
Female puberty. Because one set of puberty will make it such that under normal circumstances, you're capable of becoming pregnant. and the other pathway will make it such that you're capable of impregnating someone. And that fundamental, innate biological difference about, you know, the people who reproduce and the people who...
I think this could be more like concise. Like, sex is real. We have to just accept it and not be offended when people say it, you know. Sex is just a real thing, so...
impregnate, you know, sperm.
And the problem is I feel like trans people pretend it doesn't. Like I watched, was it yesterday or the day before? I completely lost my shit at some point. This like queer podcast. And they were like literally just being like, well, it was like just, let's pretend sex doesn't exist. Like, how do we call everything now? And it just feels preposterous to me.
An egg. That's what it comes down to. There's only two sexes. There's the large gamete producers and the small gamete producers. Do you make sperm or do you make egg? Can you potentially give birth to a baby or can you not potentially give birth to a baby? That's what it's all about. And so a young trans feminine person, which is really better conceptualized as a gender nonconforming male, because there's no such thing as a true trans kid. There's no fundamental, innate, metaphysical, intrinsic difference between an extremely gender nonconforming male and a trans identified male. There's just not. They're the same thing. And so yes, a trans identified male, or I mean, a gender nonconforming male, an extremely gender nonconforming male in childhood, going through puberty, they're not going to act the same as other males. That's why they're gender nonconforming. But that does not mean that they experienced what it was like on the other side to be female, because they're not female. And socialization fundamentally comes down to your innate sexual differences. That's what it comes down to. And they just won't experience that. So they will have a non-typical male socialization, but that doesn't mean that they have a female socialization.
You would not include trans people in the study. And so it's like they're bringing up like socialization as this like, oh, it's this unchanging, immutable thing. Like, so they're just stuck with it forever. It's like, no.
So this is kind of misleading because yes, the reason why socialization is immutable is because a male can never know what it was like to grow up female.
I mean, yeah, that's basically my point. I agree with that.
That male can never know what it was like to go through true female puberty. And even these young kids who tragically are put on these puberty blockers for non-medical reasons because of the ideological apparatus of pediatric gender medicine. And I don't support that. I don't think there's any evidence, as the Cass review and all the other systematic reviews show, that giving children puberty blockers is not a good thing. But even
yeah, he's definitely showing his bias a lot. But I lean towards that. I don't think kids should transition personally.
the children who have been put on puberty blockers as part of this gender protocol, they don't experience the other side. They also don't go through female puberty or whatever, because it's just not the same. You cannot replicate the other sex's puberty. You can just disrupt your own natural male puberty. And you can sort of go through a distorted version of male puberty by giving you cross-sex hormones. But that is not the same thing as replicating identically the experience of being a female who goes through female puberty. And that fundamental difference, it creates differences in socialization, because a trans woman, a trans-identified male, will never have to worry about getting pregnant. And if we're thinking about socialization, that difference between...
Yeah, I don't have to worry about getting pregnant. I have to worry about periods. There's a bunch of stuff. Like, I don't know if you'd say that there's certain privileges that you have over cis versions of what you turn into or whatever, but it's true. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that I shouldn't lecture other women on, and I shouldn't be like, well, I'm a woman too, so I should have an opinion on this thing. Like, when the opinion is like, what's it like having a period, you know? But yeah.
The capability of getting pregnant, that just creates fundamental differences in socialization. That goes back to evolutionary psychology 101. The most fundamental difference psychologically, sociologically, between the two sexes, between males and females, it comes down to which is the half of the species that has to invest more resources in child rearing. The female invests more resources. They invest more resources in the production of an egg versus the production of millions of sperm. So eggs are costlier to make. Also,
there's reasons why a trans person shouldn't really sort of speak for their experiences and stuff. Like, I more or less agree with all this.
Female invest way more in 9 months of pregnancy and then the subsequent years of breastfeeding. So massive parental investment. This is called the parental investment hypothesis, which is that based on which half of the species, male or female, invest more necessarily into child rearing, that's going to predict differences in behavior, differences in psychology, and differences in behavior and psychology lead to fundamental differences in socialization. And this is immutable because males can never replicate that. They can never, ever, ever replicate that.
Socialization, you're trying to tell me that you think socializing is going to stick with you forever, no matter how much you are changed? Like, have you ever
like how you're socialized? Yeah, like Jesus Christ. I was a very lonely kid. I didn't really have friends at school. I had the odd one. Because like I was a difficult person to be around, like way more than I am now. And yeah, like I think that affected me massively. Like I got to a point where I was an adult, and because I just didn't have that many like social experiences with other people and other kids and stuff my age, I grew up, I got to adulthood, I really didn't know how to do it when I was like by myself. Like I still feel like that now. Like I don't really know what I'm supposed to say to someone sometimes. And I think that like socialization does it does shape who we are, you know? I think if you have a lot of bad experiences, it's going to shape you very differently to if you've had a lot of good experiences, if you've always been around people that treat you right and seem to value you as a person. Because otherwise you kind of have to develop a lot of that kind of stuff for yourself, that kind of confidence that would have come from, other people like validating you. So this person, I think, I don't really know why they're making the arguments they are. And I don't know if they'll go into it much because it's TikTok, but hey.
Read a book? What happens? Character development. They go through things, and those experiences change them. And in that exact same...
But you cannot change. You cannot change your life such that you experience what it was like to be female, growing up female, going through female puberty, and being social
development. They can stick with you forever, no matter how much you are...
Socialization stick with you no matter how
changed. Like, have you ever read a book? What development? They go through things, and those experiences...
What if I read a book about male and female socialization? Would it teach me the opposite of what you want?
Change them. And in that exact same...
But you cannot change. You cannot change your life such that you experience what it was like to be female, growing up female, going through female puberty, and being socialized as a result of that innate sexual differences. And often, if you listen to like females talk about their experiences of what it was like being socialized as a young female, the most formative experiences like have to do with these sexual differences, these innate sexual differences. Things like sexual objectification, things like that. And that boils down to fear of getting pregnant when you don't want to be pregnant. Why? Because of the parental investment differences. Because a female has to invest way more into pregnancy. Because it's so much costlier. Pregnancy can be dangerous. You can die from becoming pregnant. So that is a very serious thing. So yes, there's a massive difference. And all the socialization differences stem from that fundamental difference in parental investment, which is the fundamental basis of evolutionary psychology, which is the basis of the socialization and the psychological differences between males and females. It all comes down to that because we are a sexually dimorphic species, just like every other animal on the planet.
Same way, it's just like even if you grow up being male socialized, if you're a trans woman, the more that you just exist in your with transitioning and everything, the more you exist, especially the more you're accepted, the more and more you then are socialized as a woman. And
no, you're not. So you're socialized as a extremely gender non-conforming male.
Where you exist, especially you just exist in your it's just like even being,
which is the basis of the socialization and the psychological differences between males and females. It all comes down to that because we are a sexually dimorphic species, just like every other animal on the planet.
Same way, it's just like even if you grow up being male socialized, if you're a trans woman, the more that you just exist in your with transitioning and everything, the more you exist, especially the more you're accepted, the more and more you then are socialized as a woman.
Yeah, this person is talking utter bollocks. I'm not socialized as a woman even now. I'm sure people have changed their attitudes towards me in some ways, but it's not the same.
No, you're not. So you're socialized as a extremely gender non-conforming male. Metaphysically speaking, intrinsically speaking, there's no difference.
Trans women have our own socialization. Even before transition, people often treat us differently from cis guys. How differently from how they treat anyone else who's different, if you get me. I can't use myself as an example of that kind of thing because I'm very insane. And as someone who's very insane, I was markedly, noticeably more insane when I was a child. So everyone treated me differently because I was extremely different, regardless of me being trans. That's one of the more normal things about me, So it's hard for me to use myself as an example. But what he's saying is you grew up a little girl, that socialization stays with you. That's part of how your personality is formed, And males and females just socialize very differently. That's just how it is. And I don't know. I don't know how you'd justify, even before transition, people often treat us differently from, I don't know how you'd begin justifying that one, but I've had where I have trans friends, but I do treat differently based on that. Okay, you might have to explain a bit more, because I don't know. I was being called slurs when I was 6. Other males... So you don't think gay males were being called, a fag and shit when they were a kid? Because I was called, pretty rude things, mostly homophobic and, retarded and shit like that, because I came off a bit gay and I was very outwardly mentally ill. So, yeah, I got called, a faggot and I got called, retarded and shit like that, but that's because of those things. It's got nothing to do with me being trans. So, I don't know how you'd, it feels a bit weird. I feel like I need to treat females differently. Maybe that's socialized, but I don't know. Yeah, I mean, everyone does, being male and being I would never hit a woman is an example of how you treat people differently. And I think people, to an extent, do treat me differently because I'm trans than because I'm male. I don't know. Don't know if you're replying to this, but I'm aware of the gay bullying males I get. Yeah, that was to someone else. I've got Twitch and YouTube chat at the same time. But yeah, it was implying other males weren't being socialized like that, being called slurs when they were a kid. I was called lots of slurs. I think most gay boys, I've watched enough RuPaul's Drag Race and heard enough gay males talk about how much bullying they got when they were a kid. They're not trans, they're gay. And, I grew up in the 90s. Gay people weren't that liked in the 90s. Like, I remember tons of homophobia. I was homophobic myself because that's just what I heard all the time was, oh, gay is like bad. Like, oh, that's gay. Like, because it's bad, you know. And when I got a bit older, it was like, well, why is that bad, you know? But yeah, I don't know. I don't see how trans people are uniquely treated differently and socialized differently before their transition even starts, especially if they haven't like expressed anything. I'm not sure. I think it can be other factors as well. So yeah, I still think this person is talking rubbish personally. Yeah, I found Ray makes a point and relies on Reddit as evidence to back up his points. Yeah, like Reddit's a difficult one because it's so like anonymous. Something like YouTube or TikTok is a lot less so because, you know, they're right there. And I guess I don't want this to be anonymous. I'm happy to put my name and my face behind my points or whatever. But like, yeah, anything could be written by anyone on Reddit. And you see plenty of like TERFs who'll find all these bizarro like stories that people tell. And the problem is some trans people act a certain way that it's difficult to see like parody from reality because some of them genuinely are saying like ridiculous shit. But then there's every chance that any Reddit post that some TERF is sharing on Twitter to point out how stupid the trans people are, there's every chance that was written by like some 15-year-old kid who's just having a laugh or like some old man or some shit, you know, it could be anyone. So yeah, I probably should go through Reddit more at some point, just at least because, you know, it's an avenue, but that's always something you got to consider. So like, yeah, I don't personally like using Reddit for that reason. And I think it's much easier to talk to and about people who will actually put their face and their name behind their opinions, if you know what I mean. Because if you're just doing it on Reddit, you can say whatever.
Between a trans-identified male socializing as a woman versus a extremely gender non-conforming male being socialized as a extremely gender non-conforming male. And when you get these extremely gender non-conforming males hanging out with women, spending time with women, picking up on, you know, how females communicate, like learning to communicate in this more like female typical way, for the autogonophiles.
I think it's easy to be mired in internet extremes and think all trans people are the same. Yeah, of course. And it happens in trans circles as well. Like, I'm constantly seeing like extremely overblown, I guess, accounts of what the world is like and what the average cis person is like, which doesn't match my experience at all. And that's not to say that that doesn't happen, but the amount of people, it kind of seems like they really don't leave their house very often, or they'll go out looking a certain way, which to them may seem normal for some reason, but to anyone else wouldn't, you know. Referring to Euphoria boner posts on Reddit and sexual, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I take a medication that kind of dulls my what was my sex drive, which I don't have much of anyway. So I just steer clear of all of that. But yeah, there's a stereotype that we're all freaks and stuff. I know. But yeah, that's the trouble with getting into like any of these thought cults. You start like, I'm also aware of the kind of kill or punch a TERF stuff. Not sure how commonplace that is. I covered what's her name? Sarah Jane Baker. I have a video on her. It's not the best thing ever because I had to watch like stuff after the fact. It actually happened on my birthday last year, so right when I was turning 33. And yeah, I saw the if you see a TERF, punch them in the face. I ended up like quoting it in a song, but I need to change it because it's a bit too on the nose. But yeah, that grossed me the fuck out. And the worst thing was like so many people were like cheering after. It's a big crowd there. Like, and then the organization defended it. It's like, what would have happened if someone saw a woman, decided they were a TERF, and like actually punched them after fucking Sarah Jane Baker said that? Like, it's mad. And, you know, everyone wants to clutch their pearls about like, you know, violent rhetoric. And then we just spit it out all the time. But then it's like any tiny thing about trans people. It's like, no, that's violent rhetoric. You can't say that. You're implying you want to kill all the transes. You don't want us to exist and stuff. But then we're also saying like punch TERFs. It's like, it's insane. You're literally giving people ammo when you say that. If you say, I necessarily would like to kill my enemies, then you're giving them ammo if they are claiming to have a more civilized position, you know? So like, someone like J.K. Rowling, it's like, you know, she'll be able to use any number of violent things people say to her. So like, why do it is kind of how I feel. We had Pancha Turf graffiti on our uni campus, or a rad femme group were doing an event on campus. Yeah, you'll get that. I don't know. I think everyone should be able to speak at these kind of things. I think people should be able to listen to things and make their mind up and be able to sort of present objections in a rational way instead of, say, Riley Gaines. I'm sure I saw like a protest outside one of her speeches at a uni, to where she was like chased into like a room that she was like locked in, and all these like people are on the other side like screaming at her and stuff. Like, to me, that's like fucked. I think anyone should be able to speak, and you know, trans people should listen to anti-trans people and present their objections, you know, in a civilized way.
This is typically done through imitation. They are social sponges. They're chameleons. They're adapting. They're learning, and that's what this person is talking about. They're talking about how it's common for trans women.
I think, well, everyone's a social sponge, right? I don't know if you can say when trans people are socializing with women, they're like soaking it all up so they can be more like you. I don't know if that's a fair characterization, I guess.
To grow up male socialized because of their innate male biological differences. And then they spend time with women.
But like the socialization thing, it's not really contestable. Like, I've seen TikToks. There was this big one that was going around a while ago. It was like some trans man that was like getting upset because he's realizing how much more difficult he's now finding it socializing as a man. When I've tried to engage with trans people, I usually get told I'm denying their existence or quickly shouted down. I get the exact same thing, and I am trans. There was a sort of thing in the back of my mind, because people are so like woke, like performatively, that's kind of just how they'd be, but it's really not the case. And like, I've been told so many times that you can't call people like fake. You can't say that person's not really trans. They do it to me all the time, so it's actually fine. You can tell anyone that they're not really trans. And denying their existence isn't true. You're disagreeing with their self-perception. That's what's happening. They just trump it up like that to make it more alarmist, you know?
Recently, I posted about how I wanted to help men and kind of bridge the gap of toxic masculinity and everything like that. And so I tried a trial and error post yesterday of my experience, and it's interesting. I commented on my stories about how a lot of you reacted so kindly, and then there have been.
They can definitely shut down a debate in a second if you're painted as genocidal, which is what they want to do. They don't want to have debates. All they want is for you to accept what they're saying 100%. And me personally, I don't see that as reasonable, so I don't do that myself.
Hit or miss. But I just don't think I have it in me to try to help society understand.
This kind of, I'm trying to help society, like, that mentality doesn't always necessarily help, but hey.
How we treat men is like so dangerous to men, because nobody told me how lonely being a man is.
So the point of this person is obviously a trans man. They would have been socialized female. They would have grown up as a female, socializing that way to at least some extent. Obviously there's variance in every female, of course. And it's just easier to make friends as a female than it is as a male, because we're just not the same in that way. And he's now realizing that other men, it's actually very difficult to like connect to, and it's not going to get easier just because you are another man. Like, it's it is what it is. Unfortunately, it's a shock to a system. Like, you get plenty of men out there that transition and then find they cross the line with women a lot because they don't really understand the sudden social boundaries that there are. And then you got a lot of trans men. They won't understand how differently men socialize and how much harder it is to make friends because that's not been their experience. So that's kind of the point behind this. I'll play the rest of it. It's not that long.
And then to have all these comments about, like justifying the coldness to men, which is valid. But to just be remembered like, oh, that's right, everybody just sees you as the villain. but to have known, and I think a lot of trans men feel this, is we knew what depth felt like before we transitioned. We knew what it felt like to like have people want to hug us and to have people want to talk to us and to have a community.
I will say in this sense, I think people are a bit nicer to me as a trans woman than they were as a man in this kind of sense.
And then you transition and you're just a guy walking down the street that people cross the street so that they're not near you.
Listen, there's ways in which male privilege exists, but, you know, there's another side to the coin as well. And unfortunately, part of being trans is experiencing that. And it's going to be hard for some people. Unfortunately, that's where we end up with stuff like this. So, you know, socialization definitely is a factor, for sure.
And friendships are so much harder to build. And people are colder and more detached. And I just don't think I have it in me to try to continuously be vulnerable on this topic because it's so long story short. This is all the energy I have to give on the topic. Like, just try to think about how you can, in your small little community where you feel safe, can reach out to the men in your life and just help them feel maybe seen for a moment. Or do little conversations to help their emotional maturity.
Yeah, there you go. Anyway, I think I made my point.
Because, you know, these trans women want nothing more than to be accepted as one of the girls, one of the women. They like crave that more than almost anything else. And so they start imitating, but they're like social chameleons, and it's sort of learning later in life. But the fundamental thing is that all those women, you know, they're dealing with things like menstruation and pregnancy and breastfeeding and rearing children and, you know, fearing, you know, getting pregnant, you know, getting, you know, like assaulted or whatever. You know, these are the things that are formative in the lives of females. And it has to do with the fundamental evolutionary psychological differences between the parental investment, those who can get pregnant and those who cannot. And I can already imagine that there's going to be some trans woman in my comment section right now saying, well, not all cis women can get pregnant. So therefore a cis woman who, you know, grows up, you know, has the same experience as like a trans woman. There's no difference there. That is not a counterexample, because there's still fundamental innate sexual differences. Because even though you might not be capable of like pregnancy, you're still going through female puberty, or your brain, your neurology, your psychology is developed based on the fact that there are innate neurological sex differences. There are innate differences between males and females. Evolutionary psychology has proven this, or at least substantiated it significantly with a lot of evidence showing that there are these innate sexual differences in the psychological behavioral patterns based on this fundamental parental investment difference. And that creates differences in socialization. So even if a young female grows up and, you know, later in life, that they will never be capable of becoming pregnant due to some, you know, sexual developmental disorder or something like this, they still are belonging to that same general class of like beings, of like humans, who have to think about this like fear or they have to structure their lives around this parental investment thing. It's just one of these fundamental innate things. And even if there are, you know, these extremely rare edge cases where you can say that, you know, there's similarities of experience, whatever, that ignores the fact that 99.9% of these autogynephilic males who develop their gender dysphoria after puberty, they develop their gender dysphoria after they've already gone through puberty, after they've already gone through the fundamental differences between males and females. You know, you just can't take that back. So most of these autogynephiles, like you know, this person who I'm guessing is gynephilic attracted.
Yeah, he does go heavy on the autogynephile thing. I don't know. I need to watch his thing about it, because like I watched it and I was like, this is definitely telling me that this can be a thing, and I kind of thought that anyway, but it doesn't really tell me why there's two categories of trans person. Like that part where it gets kind of taken to the next step is where I guess I have the issues, you know. There's probably like loads of men out there that dress like women and wanna be off to it. I don't know. Because I can't relate to this shit, and because I'm not like that much of a sexual person. Like whenever I talk about this stuff, I just get really uncomfortable.
To women, considers themselves like a trans lesbian or something. they sort of use the experience of extremely gender nonconforming males that are gender nonconforming in childhood, which are usually of the homosexual, transsexual variety, very extremely feminine, naturally feminine males. They have a different experience than other males, but they also don't experience what it's like to be female. But they often use those cases of like, oh, well, what if you go on puberty blockers as like a young trans kid and you're going to experience the same exact life, as if you were a cis girl who couldn't get pregnant or whatever. No, it's not the same. It is just not the same.
I think a trans child socialization would most likely be its own kind of thing. I think it probably wouldn't exactly mirror either socialization as a male or as a female, but I don't really know. So.
Okay, let's keep watching.
Socialization changes. The only reason they present it as an unchanging thing is because they didn't consider trans people in the study. And then there's transphobic people being like, oh, yeah, it's your male socialization. It's like, oh, sorry, you're stuck with that. It's like, that's like, oh, sorry, you were socialized to not have kids, so you're stuck with that, even though now you are a mother of 4. Like,
That's really silly. I mean, a trans woman pretty much always was socialized male. That's just how it is. Like, I hate how many of these things literally just seem to be, I'm denying what my sex was, or is, should we say. Like, it's really silly, like just accept it. Like, why do we have to go to these extents to pretend that sex isn't a thing, or to pretend that it doesn't matter and like there's much more important things,
Do you hear these mental gymnastics? Fathering children by...
And that's the other part, is like well, you wouldn't say, and then gives a completely ridiculous example that's, first of all, nothing like what they're saying, but also is like way more pumped up, suddenly I'm a mother of 5 or whatever. It's like, come on.
By adding sperm.
All I can guess is that this kind of argument style is very persuasive to most trans people, and I'm just not one of them in that way for some reason.
To the equation. Your contribution to the equation is is like giving sperm, or you can adopt. But that is not the same as becoming pregnant, as menstruating and going through the menstrual cycle and becoming pregnant and breastfeeding and all these things. Like trying to compare the raising of children, the parenting of children, versus the more fundamental act of giving birth to children, which is the quintessential female experience. That is.
I think we get. Is there much more of this person talking? Oh, they talk a little bit more. I know what he's saying. Yeah. I'm not skipping as I disagree. It's just kind of, we're getting on a bit.
These social roles, you can have your child call you a mother, but that doesn't mean you are a mother, because mothering has to do with parental producing eggs. That's what it's all about. So
it's ridiculous in any other context. But yeah, it honestly brings up an aspect of anytime people are citing these studies,
it's ridiculous in any other context. What other contexts will we talk about like someone's socialization in this way? This is the problem. A lot of these issues are ones that trans people bring up by existing, which is fine. Like, there's nothing wrong with like talking about them, but it's like saying that, well, this doesn't apply to anything else is, well, what else applies to changing your gender within the human race,
It's like, they didn't include me in that. Like, they didn't include my population. I'm an outlier. Like, duh.
You're not an outlier.
Okay, I'm probably going to agree with what you're saying. Like, that person in that TikTok, I think, is pretty deranged in the shit they're saying. Like, it seems a lot more pretending that sex doesn't exist. Like, well, I've decided sex doesn't exist. What now? And it's like, it does still exist. The reason you exist, in fact. So yeah, Ray Alex Williams. Yeah, his stuff's interesting. I'll probably watch more. I don't know how much on stream because it's quite dry. Maybe I can't talk in that sense, but yeah, I don't know. I agree with some stuff.